Hello everyone, and today's session we are going to focus on how we can authorize users to access or give them access to the services in Azure, whatever in cloud, which has been running. We as an organization that is being hosted on their Azure cloud subscriptions and their uh, environment. Now, if we come to understand first what is access in terms of Azure, we call it that as uh, RBAC, role-based role-based access control. So based on the roles, what type of roles we will define in Azure, and based on that we will control the access of the users. Or there are different identities in Entra. So far, what we have explained is users, but there are uh, SPNs, service principals. We have managed identities, and so how we can give access to those, we'll also look at that. We have checked about users and groups, how what they are. But in the further sessions, we will be talking about how we can manage the other managed identity and service principals, SPNs, also for as an example. Uh, we have to bring that topic here because in the country they are related to giving the access also. But we will see slowly in the further topics, we will give more idea about those service principles and managed identities. As of now, we'll focus on how we can create roles, what are the existing roles which are there, and Azure మీ క్లౌడ్ ఎన్విరాన్మెంట్ లోకి వచ్చినప్పటికి how different types of roles are there and ఏ సిచ్యువేషన్స్ లో ఏది వాడతాం అనేది తెలుసుకోవాల్సి వస్తుంది, and that's what we'll focus on this session on that. So first, manage built-in roles. So when we specifically talk about RBAC, we only talk about accessing Azure resources. As I already mentioned in the previous sessions, resources అంటే ఏంటి? Any service instances. I create a VM 10 VMs, then there are 10 Azure resources, or we can also call 10 VM resource types. Okay, but 10 resources, and there are like storage account. We created 10 storage accounts. There are disks, 10 disks we have created. There are 10 virtual networks like that. Let's keep there's one, two, three virtual networks. Now, in total, there are 32 resources, Azure resources. In that, 10 are virtual machine resource type, 10 are storage account resource type, 10 are disk resource type, and 10 are 2 are virtual network resource type. Okay. Now, when we talk about RBAC, we are giving access to Azure resources in a subscription and not to the Entra tenant. So there are two verticals in Azure Cloud. One is Entra tenant and the subscriptions where resources gets created and all that. So in terms of access, we differentiate them as uh, this way. Let me annotate. We term that as Azure roles and Entra roles. So there are two roles. One Azure roles are focused on Azure service, Azure resources, and that's where RBAC comes in picture. Entra roles focus on Entra ID, giving access to Entra ID. Now, this is a critical one because they are also termed as administrator roles. Administrator roles. So we don't want administrator roles to be assigned to normal users unless they have been defined that they have to play the role of the administration activities and all that. So now, in terms of when we're talking about the RBAC and all that, we are focusing on this topic. And after this, we will be talking about Entra roles, how we can manage the access to Entra ID. The reason is because if this is a critical role, anything you want, anything you or your users want to do in your organization, first thing they have to do is authenticate. They have to give their right credentials and all that. Now that is entirely being managed by Entra. So if this is not secure, then entire environment itself has been lost. So that's why they are termed as administrator roles and all that. And even this is very important because your data entirely is being your application hosted data and entirely is in this environment. Now, if this environment is not properly secured, you will lose the data and the entire application can also go down. It can happen anything. So both are simultaneously important, but so they are differed in different ways. And we will be talking right now on our backspace Azure roles, role-based access controls. Clear this. And in terms of RBAC Azure roles, there are two types of roles Azure in terms of RBAC roles. One is built-in roles and one are custom roles, built-in roles, and that's what you're seeing. That's what they mentioned it. And the next one is custom roles. The naming convention itself has completely portraying that this is built by Azure, already existing, and that means they are being built by Azure, Microsoft, and they are provided to all the customers whoever are using Azure. Custom roles are something which you or your org creates. Now, which are mostly used? It depends based on the organization. Whichever organization have defined their custom roles, everything properly, will be end up using custom roles. And whoever have defined their, having defined much of their permissions and all that, or didn't segregate properly how the roles have, what type of actions they each team will be doing and all that, then they will generalize it and they will use built-in roles. Uh, so when you don't define the properly what are their permissions or actions that have to be done within your teams and all that, then custom using custom roles becomes a very cumbersome process or చాలా టఫ్ అయిపోతుంది ఎందుకంటే ప్రతిసారి ఎవడో ఒకడు వచ్చి నాకు ఈ యాక్సెస్ కావాలి నాకు ఈ పర్మిషన్ రావట్లేదు నేను ఇది చేయలేకపోతున్నాను ఇది అది అని అంటారు ఎందుకంటే వెన్ యూ డోంట్ డిఫైన్ దోస్ యాక్షన్స్ పర్మిషన్స్ ప్రాపర్లీ అండ్ ఆల్ దట్ ది కస్టమ్ రోల్స్ విల్ ఓన్లీ గివ్ ద లిమిటెడ్ యాక్సెస్ అండ్ ఆల్ దట్ ఆర్ దే మే గివ్ over high access also. So it doesn't serve the purpose of built-in roles are mostly used and but organizations as they're adapting to cloud ఇదంతా ఎక్కువ they're also defining what type of permissions or actions their teams are doing and they're accordingly changing their custom roles, defining their custom roles and using that. Okay, now మనము portal point of view చూద్దాం how they look like. So if I go into portal and if I open, so whether I open a subscription or a resource group or any service, if I can able to open anything. No, I didn't have anything, but let me create a simple virtual network. Okay. Now, what I wanted to show is whether you go in a subscription, you can access your subscription access control IAM, or you can access from your resource group IAM, or you can go to a specific resource and you will find access control. So anywhere you will be finding this option in any service wherever you go in subscriptions or resource groups or resource, a specific resource wherever it is mapped to. and we call them at IAM or access control. That is where you will be finding what roles are there. So these are, when you click on roles, you will be finding what all built-in roles which are there. And you see here the type is built-in roles. If you wanted custom roles, let me see if this has a custom role or not. There are two custom roles which were being created, and you can see those. And the rest are all built-in roles. And there are, based on services, there will be different roles. Suppose let's take virtual machine. In virtual machine, we have virtual machine administrator role. And what does this role offers? We see in definitions also. So you can see the definition of administrator login. We use virtual machines in portal. Login as administrator. Virtual machine contributor lets you manage virtual machines but not access them. So you can, if you want more details on that, you can click on view and we will be able to see the description more and how we can define the permissions and all that. So these are all the permissions or actions they can do in this role. So that is what I'm trying to say. మీరు ఇప్పుడు ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్ వాళ్ళ పర్మిషన్స్ అని డిఫైన్ చేయకపోతే కస్టమ్ రోల్ అనేది డిఫైన్ చేయడం ఇలా రాయడం అనేది చాలా కష్టంగా ఉంటుంది. It is not so tough as you may look at it. As you understand more about Azure services and their actions, what you, when you play with it, you will be able to understand these actions better and all that. Right now, ఇప్పుడు ఏం చూసినప్పుడు ఏంటంటే అబ్బో ఏదో కోడింగ్ లా అనిపిస్తుంది, but it is not really so. It's not so tough. It as it looks. Okay, it just you need to be aware of what does the policy definition mean? What does role assignment mean? What does availability set mean? ఇవన్నీ తెలుసుకోవాల్సి వస్తుంది అంతే. ఓకే, సో ఈచ్ సర్వీస్ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూ డిఫరెంట్ ఉంటాయి. సపోజ్ యూఆర్ టాకింగ్ అబౌట్ స్టోరేజ్ అకౌంట్ తీసుకోండి. స్టోరేజ్ అని టైప్ చేస్తాను. You will be having Azure Container Storage Contributor, Azure Container Storage Operator, Azure File Sync Administrator, Azure Data Defender. This is not the one. Storage Account Encryption Scope Contributor, Storage Blob Data Contributor. అలాగా సర్వీసెస్ బట్టి మనము బిల్ట్ ఇన్ రోల్స్ అనేవి ఉంటాయి, లేదంటే మనం డిఫైన్ చేసుకోవచ్చు. ఓకే, సో వాట్ ఆర్ ది మోస్ట్లీ యూజ్డ్ బిల్ట్ ఇన్ రోల్స్ అని అంటే, నార్మల్గా అందరు ఇంటర్వ్యూ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూలో చాలా మంది చెప్తారు ఓనర్, కాంట్రిబ్యూటర్, రీడర్ అనేది. ఓకే, బట్ if you're saying you're a Kubernetes experience ante, they will ask you what is the experience you have understanding on permissions you would be needing to pull images or push images into ACR. Then you can have to say ACR pull, push, because that's are being used per service point of view. What are the roles which we have in terms of virtual machine? So virtual machine, a login administrator, Azure virtual machine contributor, user login, ఇవన్నీ చెప్తాము. And in case if you have storage, the most commonly used as storage blob data contributor. What is the difference between the previous ones in terms of storage వచ్చినప్పటికి? కాన్ఫిగరేషన్ ఇలా దీంట్లోకి వెళ్ళి ఏదైనా చేంజ్ చేయాలి అని అంటే, సర్వీస్లోకి వెళ్ళి రిసోర్స్లోకి వెళ్ళి ఏమైనా చేంజ్ చేయాలంటే, ఇట్స్ you can assign certain things like Azure Container Contributor and all that. But if you wanted to go and access inside that service, there is a data, then you would need storage blob data contributor, storage data owner. సో ఒకసారి పర్ సర్వీస్ మీరు తెలుసుకుంటున్న తర్వాత దాంట్లోకి వెళ్ళి ఐఎమ్స్లోకి వెళ్ళి ఆ సర్వీస్ మీద ఇలా సింపుల్గా మొత్తం టైప్ చేయొద్దు. యూ మే నాట్ ఫైండ్ ద ఎంటైర్ వన్, బట్ ఆల్మోస్ట్ సిమిలర్ స్కోప్లో స్టోరేజ్ అని టైప్ చేస్తే, వర్చువల్ మెషిన్లో వర్చువల్ అని టైప్ చేసి పెడితే, వర్చువల్ నెట్వర్క్లో నెట్వర్క్ అని టైప్ చేసి పెడితే, you will be able to see some related informations. Okay. Now, if you're not able to find also there, it is much more easier if you're going and saying Azure roles learn. So there's so learn ఎందుకు టైప్ చేస్తానంటే learn.microsoft.com నుంచి రావాలని చెప్పి. So That's the documentation link for Microsoft. So learn.microsoft.com lo, if I type here network, Control F, and I'll be able to see anything on networking point of view. So you could define చేసాడు networking మీద. So what are the roles which we have in terms of networking? What are the roles which we have in terms of storage? What are the roles? So based on the services, you can go and check on the roles and at least దాంట్లో roles లో ఏమేమి యాక్షన్స్ ఉంటున్నాయి ఏంటి అనేది ఒకసారి అండ్ చూస్తూ ఉంటే యాక్షన్స్ ఎలా చూస్తాము? When you type on the IAM role and you click on the view, you would be here telling what permissions and descriptions అనేవి మెన్షన్ చేస్తారు. ఒక ఐడియా వస్తుంది కొంతవరకు అట్లీస్ట్. దాని మీద ఒక ఫైట్ ఒక్కొక్క రోల్ మీద ఒక సబ్జెక్ట్ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూలో నెట్వర్క్ మీద కపుల్ ఆఫ్ 10 రోల్స్ చూసి 10 రోల్స్ లో మీకు ఏవి ఇంట్రెస్టింగ్ అనిపిస్తున్నాయి ఏంటి దాని మీద ఒకసారి నొక్కి ఆ పర్మిషన్స్ చూసి ఆ పర్మిషన్స్ డిస్క్రిప్షన్స్ అర్థం చేసుకొని దట్ ఈస్ వెన్ యూ విల్ గెట్ ఎ బెటర్ ఐడియా ఇస్ వాట్ ఐ మోర్ ఆన్ దట్. ఇప్పుడు వెళ్ళి ఒక్కొక్క దాని మీద ఎక్స్ప్లోర్ చేయడానికి ఇట్స్ నాట్ ఈజీ థింగ్, బట్ I would say that's how I try to learn, but you can do it. And RBAC, the Azure documentation, they gave it. What is Azure RBAC? See, first thing says RBAC మనం డిఫైన్ ఇస్తున్నప్పుడు పర్మిషన్స్ అసైన్ చేస్తున్నప్పుడు ఎక్స్ప్లెయిన్ మీ RBAC అని అంటే చాలా మంది ఎవరైనా అడిగితే ఇంటర్వ్యూ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూలో అయినా నార్మల్గా వాట్ ఈస్ RBAC అని అంటే రోల్ బేస్డ్ యాక్సెస్ కంట్రోల్. సో యూఆర్ టేకింగ్ an identity. If you see here, identities are okay, user, group, service principal, managed identity. So there are 4 items. Any of those you will can give access to a service. So మనం చూస్తున్నప్పుడు నాకు 3 tabs లో ఒకటి సబ్స్క్రిప్షన్, ఇంకొకటి రిసోర్స్ గ్రూప్, ఇంకొకటి రిసోర్స్. ఐ కెన్ గివ్ యాక్సెస్ టు ఏ యూజర్ టు ఏ సబ్స్క్రిప్షన్ అంటే అప్పుడు ఎంటైర్ సబ్స్క్రిప్షన్ లో ఉన్న రిసోర్సెస్ అన్నిటికీ యాక్సెస్ ఉంటుంది. ఒక గ్రూప్ కి మొత్తం నేను ఇస్తే ఆ గ్రూప్ లో ఉన్న యూజర్స్ అందరికి ఆర్ ఎస్పిఎన్స్ కి, సర్వీస్ ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ కి, మేనేజ్డ్ ఐడెంటిటీస్ ఏమేమి ఉన్నాయో ఆ గ్రూప్ లో అన్నిటికీ యాక్సెస్ వస్తుంది. ఏం యాక్సెస్ ఇస్తున్నాం అనేది. సో ఏ యాక్సెస్ ఇస్తున్నాం అనేదే రోల్ పేరు. ఓనర్ రోల్ ఇస్తున్నామా, కాంట్రిబ్యూటర్ రోల్ ఇస్తున్నామా, రీడర్ రోల్ ఇస్తున్నామా, బ్యాకప్ ఆపరేటర్ రోల్ ఇస్తున్నామా, సెక్యూరిటీ రీడర్ రోల్ ఇస్తున్నామా, యూజర్ యాక్సెస్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ రోల్ ఇస్తున్నామా అనేవన్నీ డిఫైన్ చేస్తాం. సో ఇంటర్వ్యూలో మీకు జనరల్గా ఎలాంటి క్వశ్చన్స్ వస్తాయి అని అంటే, ఇఫ్ ఐ వాంటెడ్ టు give permissions to other users, so I have access to a resource group and I can manage the access of users, groups, service principals, managed identities who are being given permissions to those that resource group. Ante, what role should I have to manage that kind of level of access? That I can only manage the whatever RBAC roles are being assigned to that resource group is anante, then it is user access administrator is the role you would be needing. So what does that mean, user access administrator? So let me show that. I'll go into the resource group. Now let me assign a role, a reader role to employee one. So what am I doing? I'm managing the access to of users uh, to this resource group. Now, if that I will have to do, then I should have permissions to have give access, and that's called user access administrator role. And you could see here, employee one, I gave the access, and if I wanted to delete it, I can go ahead and do it. So that kind of that role is being defined as user access administrator. In this way, they're going to ask you questions that what is this role or what is give me the role name if I have to do it, or what does the owner role do? What does the reader role do? These are general questions for a fresher to 1 year, 2 years experience, mostly. But if they can also go jump into what does the storage data blob contributor does, what does storage data reader does, or what does ACR pull or ACR push does. So ACR pull and ACR push, the name itself is saying if someone tries to ask a question on that point of view, you will be able to say clearly, right? ACR push means you're pushing something to ACR, and what will be pushing to Azure Container Registry? Images. So so instead of asking that way, they will try to ask in the reverse way. What is the role name for pushing the images into ACR, or what does the Kubernetes needs, cluster needs, permissions to for in a, for the for accessing the images from Azure Container Registry, and that's when you can actually say ACR pull and all that. So that's the smart ways they will try to ask questions and all that. But this is what is on RBAC. So assign different roles at different scopes. This is called identity in RBAC. We call this as identity. This is called role definition. And at what scope are you giving? These are called scopes. So there are three scopes: subscription scope, RG scope, and resource scope. There is another higher scope, which we call it as management group, which we will get to know. We'll talk about it in later point of time. Okay. Group of subscriptions, we can keep them under one management group and all that. But that's a higher level, parent level resource, which we can get to talk about it at some point of time. But as of now in RBAC, we call this as at what scope are we giving permission. So I always try to tell to this kind of example to remember how the RBAC works. So there is huge buildings. You wanted to control who comes in, who goes out. Okay. So you will keep a security in charge for each building. Now inside and entire area, you will keep one security in charge. Okay. Now, the security in charge may have a supervisor, security guard can have a security supervisor who oversees everything. And there will be a security supervisor to a building probably, and this will be a security guard again to the building. The security supervisor may look at security guard subsections of each floor. Let's say we are a diamond business. Let's keep it that way. So we are a huge diamond business. So I keep natural diamonds here. I keep my the lab grown diamonds here and all that. So based on the uh, how I can give access to how users and all that, who can check what, who will have the locker keys, who will be able to assist the team and all that. You need to check all these things. So ఈ example లో what I would say is if the user is coming, okay, and or if this security guard కి ఒక రోల్ అసైన్ చేస్తున్నప్పుడు ఏ ఏ లెవెల్లో ఏ ఏరియాలో స్కోప్ అసైన్ చేస్తున్నాం, మొత్తం ఏరియాకి చేస్తున్నామా, ఒక బిల్డింగ్ కి చేస్తున్నామా, ఒక ఫ్లోర్ కి చేస్తున్నామా. సో ఇది మొత్తం ఏరియా అంటే సబ్స్క్రిప్షన్ వేసుకోండి, ఒక బిల్డింగ్ అంటే ఆర్జీ వేసుకోండి, ఆర్జీలో ఫ్లోర్ అంటే రిసోర్స్ వేసుకోండి. ఓకే. The security guard is let's keep it the identity and what role you are giving to them. Based on that, they will do that action. Okay. And interpret access assignment. So ikkada varaku we completed what is RBAC. Okay. We'll talk about Entra roles. So what is Entra role? Entra roles are managing the access to Entra ID. So when we call this, there are administrator roles inside the Entra ID, and they entirely manage the access to Entra ID atmosphere. So there are when we look at user managing the users, there will be user administrator role. మీరు ఇదే వర్డ్ ఆర్బ్యాక్ లో కూడా విన్నారు, కానీ గుర్తుపెట్టుకోండి, యూజర్, నేను అక్కడ యూజర్ యాక్సెస్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ రోల్ అని అన్నా. ఆడేదో అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ కనబడితే అది ఎంటర్ రోల్ అయిపోదు. ఓకే, యూ నీడ్ టు రిమెంబర్ దిస్ వన్ అండ్ స్లోగా హ్యాబిచుయేట్ అవుతుంది. ఓకే, I said user access administrator role to manage whom should I give access to, at what level I can give access to, at subscription resource group and resources అని చెప్పేసి చెప్పాను. అండ్ ఇక్కడ ఎంటర్ ఐడికి వచ్చినప్పటికి యూజర్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ రోల్ అని అంటున్నా. దే ద యూజర్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ రోల్స్ అసైన్ చేస్తే ఎవరికైనా, ఓకే, దే విల్ బి ఏబుల్ టు మేనేజ్ యూజర్స్, ఎంట్రా యూజర్స్, టు డిలీట్ దెమ్, క్రియేట్ దెమ్, ఆన్ బోర్డ్ దెమ్ అండ్ ఆల్ దోస్ థింగ్స్. యూజర్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ రోల్. గ్రూప్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ రోల్ కూడా ఉంటుంది. ఓకే, ఓకే, వేర్ యు ఆర్ మేనేజింగ్ ది ఎంట్రా గ్రూప్స్. అప్లికేషన్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ ఉంటుంది. దట్ మీన్స్ యూఆర్ క్రియేటింగ్ ఎస్పిఎన్, సర్వీస్ ప్రిన్సిపల్స్. Like that you can give different roles. Global administrator role అని ఉంటుంది, that will give the entire access to the entire Entra ID. Security administrator role అని ఉంటుంది. Okay, that will give the access to manage the security configurations of the Entra ID. Privileged identity administrator role ఉంటుంది, giving the access to users based on for PIM. సో పిమ్ అనే వర్డ్ ఎక్కడ మాట్లాడాను నేను? P2 లైసెన్స్ లో మాట్లాడా. There are three types of licenses. So దాంట్లో as of now you have to know is the Entra ID free license, P1 license, P2 license, and mostly every license will be used, but organizations won't give that license to users that easily because they get charged per user. Okay, and what else? So let me show you how the Entra roles looks like and where can we find Entra roles. RBAC roles you would have seen in the RBAC, right? In the IAM and all that, where you can find RBAC and sections మాట్లాడేస్తే దీంట్లో there is, if you want to check your access, what type of access, you can click on view my access, and if what roles are being assigned, you could be able to see that roles which are being assigned. Role as That's called role assignment. And what are the built-in roles or custom roles which I have, then you can see it. Deny assignments is the next level where we can block the access to that identities and all that. So let me show you Entra ID role. So where can I find Entra roles? If you look here, roles and administrators in the Entra ID. Okay, Microsoft Entra ID, you can see. And here you can see that the roles which I have is global administrator role. That what does a global administrator role do? Can manage all aspects of Entra ID and Microsoft services and use Entra identities. This is a privileged role they're showing it. So they don't give it just directly like that. Even global reader role is a privileged ID. Why? Even they can't do anything, you can get to see as a global reader lot of permissions what are being assigned, like conditional access policies and all those things. So that's not a good thing to be known for everyone. So mostly privileged roles మీద కొన్ని అడుగుతారు. So if you look at external users ఇదంతా కూడా, so external ID is a different one. We can talk about that later on. But that is ID is meant to access manage the external users ఇదంతా. Privileged authentication. This is a privileged role. This is an important role. This is an important role: security administrator, security operator, security reader. So most of the, as I said, you will be able to see privileged ones are the most commonly used by organizations, or you will be asked upon that one when they go talk about what are roles. So this is it. How can we assign permissions into users is all that? The same thing. I go into a specific role. I can take an application administrator role. Okay. Uh, and I can go and give the access. So for that, can I do that here? No. I'll go here to users and I can go and assign roles. Click on assignments. Here it will show me what role I want to assign. So AI administrator. If I wanted to give that, I can select this and I can click on add and I can give the access to that. And if I'm a user access administrator permissions nakunte, I can go ahead and delete the user, employee one, user 01 user. Okay. Or I can add new users. So అలాగా ఈ two roles అనేవి define అయి ఉన్నాయి. You can go and research further, but these are the concepts which are there on this topic. So in next sessions, we will be focusing on the rest of the topics which you can see here. That is it. Thank you.